Good evening and welcome. I'm Charles Overby, Chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics, and I want to welcome all of you here tonight. This is our second program of the spring semester. We're just delighted you can join us. We're going to have a lively program talking about Mississippi politics. We might even get into a little bit of national politics, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from all of this. It's informal. We look forward to your joining the conversation. Each one of these programs this semester are billed to be a conversation, not just with Curtis and me, but with all of you in the audience as well. We'll have a reception afterwards. You'll have a chance to talk to our distinguished panelists and also to Curtis, which is a joy in itself. Curtis Wilkie is the senior fellow at the Overby Center, and he defines Southern politics, and he has been here from the first. And I'm going to turn the program over to him, and then we'll ping pong back and forth with our guests. Curtis?
Thank you, Charles. I want to welcome our guests tonight. We have two Ole Miss journalism grads back, so we're particularly proud of that. Emily Wagster Pettus, she is with the Associated Press in Jackson, a real veteran of covering Mississippi and Mississippi politics, and Adam Ganucheau, who's now with Mississippi Today, and a more recent graduate of Ole Miss journalism, former student of mine, and on a personal note. Adam, I'll throw the first question to you, and I should say that, I think political writers are under certain constraints. We're not going to ask them to make predictions and go way out on limbs. You do that, and you kind of lose your objectivity, and you make politicians mad if you say they don't have a chance or things like that. But Adam, you had a piece. I think you and Bobby wrote it together about Tate Reeves recently, the Lieutenant Governor of Mississippi. And it's a lot of swagger you see in some Republican circles that this guy is invincible. He's going to run for governor this year. Your piece talked about how he's not the most popular guy at the legislature where he controls the state senate. Can Tate Reeves be beaten this year?
I think the short answer is yes on that question. As you pointed out, Tate Reeves is sort of this figure in the Capitol. He does have that swagger. He has the ability to kill or usher through legislation if he wants to. That said, he has spent his 7 years, eighth legislative session as lieutenant governor, saying no to a lot of people. And I think the way he puts it, Emily, is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think, I'm not afraid to say no to my friends if I have to. That might be, I think, his way of couching sort of his unpopularity even within Republican circles. The story that you mentioned that I wrote with my colleague Bobby Harrison, who has been covering politics from Jackson for 25 years, Tate Reeves called every Republican senator to a lunch. And he asked them to sign, this was mid-January, he asked them all to sign a pledge card, pledging their support of his gubernatorial run this year. Several of them said no and left the lunch and called me and Bobby. So, knowing this about Lieutenant Governor Reeves, that he isn't the most liked politician in Jackson, I think that's a story that all of us have been trying to tell for a while now, at least I have. And that was perhaps the best example of his unlikability even within his own party. So because of that reason, I think the short answer to your question, can he be beaten, is yes. The long answer is it's going to take some pretty strong candidates to knock him off. And not to mention that he's raised $7 million to date, which is on pace to be the most well-funded candidate in Mississippi political history. So, it's going to take a lot to outraise him. It's going to take a lot of harnessing that unlikability, perhaps, that he has. And getting that right message to voters.
Emily, you've covered the lieutenant governor for a long time, long before he was a candidate for governor. Let's step back a little bit in time here and get some perspective for our audience. Tell us your analysis of him as he's gone up through the chairs in the legislature to lieutenant governor.
Sure. So Tate Reeves was not yet 30 years old when he won his first statewide office. He's actually never served as a House member or a senator. He was elected state treasurer when he was 29 years old, served 2 terms in that office, and then he was elected to the open office of lieutenant governor. So as Adam said, he's now concluding his 2nd term as lieutenant governor.
And based on your years of covering him, what are your dominant impressions of him?
Tate Reeves is smart, he's stubborn, he wants what he wants, and he is not afraid to wield the power of the office of lieutenant governor. In Mississippi, sure if you've studied politics here, you know that we have a constitution that sets up a relatively weak governorship and a strong legislative branch. The lieutenant governor is the presiding officer of the state senate. As such, that person, he or she, can appoint or does have the power to appoint senators to committees and appoint the committee chairman and vice chairman, and the lieutenant governor also assigns bills to committee, which means that the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House has similar powers in the House of Representatives. So these 2 people really control the legislative process, and they have controlled it to a greater degree in the past 7, now 8 years than previous lieutenant governors and speakers did. Now, there have been powerful people in those positions before, but it really has struck me. I've been covering this since 1994, and under Philip Gunn's speakership and Tate Reeves as lieutenant governor, the power has really become more centralized in each chamber.
Let's stick to the Republicans here for a minute because of the latest announcement by Chief Justice Bill Waller, Jr., who's going to run as a Republican for governor also. So that sets up a real primary. There was one other candidate who not so well known, but Judge Waller is not only been Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, he's the son of Bill Waller, who was a very popular governor from 71 to 75, I believe. In fact, David Sansing, our great historian in Mississippi, called Bill Waller Sr., the late Bill Waller, the real transformative governor in Mississippi history, because he kind of bridged that period from a run of segregationists to a more modern era. Even though Bill Waller Jr. has only been running for the state Supreme Court in his own particular district, hasn't run statewide, he's still a name. Throw it out at both of you all. How formidable is Judge Waller going to be? Emily?
I think that, as you said, Judge Waller does bring a lot of name recognition to this race. However, let's look around this room at how many people were born long after his father had left public service. It might matter to people who are 60 and older, but to anyone younger than that, it's probably not going to have much effect. Bill Waller Jr., the family is respected. He has run in 1/3 of the state. He's been elected in that central district to the state Supreme Court. Running for Supreme Court is much, much different than running for governor. When you run for Supreme Court, you basically can't say anything other than, I will be a fair judge. You're not allowed to express opinions on issues that might come before the court. There are interest groups that run ads that get into, when my opponent was a circuit judge, he let murderers and rapists run free. The candidates themselves are not allowed to say those things. So we don't yet know whether Bill Waller Jr. is going to sort of have that toughness to, go directly at Tate Reeves. And we've seen that Tate Reeves can be a tough campaigner.
Can I ask Adam?
Yeah. I think two things. First off, it's hard to know because of what Emily said. You know, as a judge, you cannot run on issues really, or you can't express your opinion on issues. We don't know where Bill Waller Jr. is going to align himself on any issue. I mean, I can't tell you a single issue where he would fall on the political spectrum. So that's going to be interesting. But you know, when he last week is when this news broke, and he himself didn't really make an announcement. He sort of let some political operatives leak it essentially to the press, and those pro-Waller operatives, you know, right out of the gate, they suggested that he's going to run a campaign, the only campaign that can beat Jim Hood in the general. And I know that we'll talk about Attorney General Hood in a minute, but you know, he's running, it seems like, or at least his people have been pushing this on reporters and the public. He's running as that guy who can sort of use Tate Reeves's unlikability and harness that support in a Republican primary, and then sort of bolster his candidacy come November. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. In terms of, you know, just being a formidable opponent, I think, you know, Tate Reeves is $7 million again. That's hard to overcome. So I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see, one, where Waller falls on issues, because I think Mississippians really will want to know, how are you a different candidate than Tate Reeves or Robert Foster, the lesser-known state representative, but also how much money can he raise? When Tate Reeves has spent 7 years building this war chest and these tight relationships with big time corporations and donors. So
I do think we should talk just for a moment about Robert Foster. He's a first-term state representative. He is from DeSoto County, which is extremely important in the Republican primary. You can basically win a Republican primary in Mississippi by winning DeSoto County, Madison and Rankin County there around Jackson, Harrison and Jackson County down on the Gulf Coast, and then just a small number of other counties. Robert Foster comes from the Tea Party sort of section or segment of the Republican Party. He is going to be competing for the same people that Chris McDaniel competed for in the past 2 U.S. Senate elections. Foster might have just cut Chris McDaniel off at the knees. Chris has been very low-key about what his plans are this year, with, you know, governor, lieutenant governor. I don't think he's going to run for attorney general at this point because there are well-funded candidates in that. But so Robert Foster hopped out there in front of Chris McDaniel. And so, and of course, filing deadline, you probably know this, is March 1st. So the fields are not yet set. We could end up with like a 7 or 8 person Republican primary, or it could just be the 3-person primary that we're talking about right now. But, you know, Foster can really kind of make things interesting for Waller and Reeves. He'll get some votes. He doesn't have much money, but he'll get some votes.
Good point.
And he's also running against the Tate Reeves establishment. I mean, when he announced, he like gave quotes. I mean, this was like in his announcement speech, you know, something along the lines of, "I'm running against the expected, you know, front runner." Essentially, he didn't name Reeves, you know, of course, but he is sort of building his candidacy around, "I'm going to beat Tate Reeves."
Right, and he is out campaigning.
For sure.
So Emily, you did a good job of identifying this handful of counties that will decide the primary. And of course, it is a primary race to begin with. Can the two of you handicap the geographical strength or weaknesses of the candidates?
Sure, I think Jim Hood comes into it on the Democratic side, the 4th-term Attorney General.
I'm talking about the Republican
Republicans,
primary.
okay, we'll stick with Republicans for now. So Tate Reeves and Bill Waller are both from the Jackson area. Reeves lives out in Flowood, which is a suburb. Waller lives in Jackson. And Foster, as I already mentioned, lives up in DeSoto County. So Foster will have his regional strength up north. And then if you look at Metro Jackson, Rankin County is very important for Republican primary. Madison County is important as well. Both of those candidates, Waller and Reeves, have deep connections in different communities. So Waller obviously is well known among attorneys, you know, people who practice before the Supreme Court. He also has business community connections. Reeves is very much drawing on the business community for his support. When you look down at the Gulf Coast, that's more kind of wild card for those two candidates. Reeves has campaigned 4 times statewide, and so 4 different elections he's gone down to the coast and really made an effort. Again, Waller has just campaigned in central Mississippi, so he may have strength that we're not yet seeing on the coast, but for now, he really is going to have to make up a lot of ground.
So is it possible the Gulf Coast could decide the outcome?
It is.
Yeah, Tate, I think this morning, Tate's campaign sent out a list of endorsements that he's received over the last week or so, and there were probably, 25 or 30 names on that list, and 90% of them were based in Rankin County, which I believe is the county with the most Republican primary voters traditionally.
Right, but to be fair about that list, it was really just designed as a central Mississippi list. It was not intended as a comprehensive statewide.
Right. So, I mean, Reeves lives in Rankin County. That's where he has a lot of his political allies. There's something called the Rankin County Mafia, which
They don't actually kill people.
They don't kill people, but they kill the hopes and dreams of opponents in elections. It's like a breakfast club. This is literally true. I mean, it's like a breakfast club of businessmen and just sort of Rankin County establishment Republican folks who get together once a month or so, and they have candidates come through and speak to their club, and dozens of folks show up, but the leader of that, Earl Dean Rhodes, is his name.
Former Chancery Clerk.
That's right. He can handicap a Republican primary because however the Rankin County Mafia decides to support a candidate, that candidate almost always wins.
Look, and
maybe always wins.
If you really want to get into the weeds on this, I covered Rankin County back in the early 90s. There are kind of 2 Rankin counties culturally. There's sort of South Rankin County, like Florence and Richland, and that's where Tate Reeves grew up. And then there's sort of Northwest Rankin, which is more affluent, and the people in South Rankin County, people think the people in North Rankin County are kind of rich and snobby, and that's where Tate lives now. So he walks in both of those worlds. And it's not a small thing when you look at the way politics happens in that county.
Speaking of snobby Rankin County, is that where the famous road was built?
It is, yes.
Well, you might need to explain that, one of you.
Yeah, it's going to obviously be a campaign issue. The people have already been beating up on it. One of you explain better than I can about the Tate Reeves Road.
Sure. The short version is that there was reporting last year that Tate Reeves pressured the Mississippi Department of Transportation to build a very short frontage road from a busy section of Highway 25, or Lakeland Drive as we call it in the Jackson area, to his gated neighborhood where there are like $400,000, $500,000 houses. It's a road that wouldn't be used by many people. And yes, it's going to be used over and over and over against him.
It's going to still have legs as an issue.
Yes.
He has, for the record, denied any pressuring of MDOT to build this road. I think, $2 million? Whatever the cost was, I think it was $2 million. Attorney General Jim Hood, who's running as a Democrat against him, in his duties as Attorney General, launched an investigation into the background of this, which, of course, Tate called a political stunt. But that investigation is ongoing. I think we last wrote an update about it in late December. Essentially, the AG's office has interviewed MDOT employees and requested documents. So they're digging on this. And, you can call it a political stunt or not, but I think Jim Hood's role as Attorney General, that's what the Attorney General does, is investigates whether or not state money was misspent
Sure. I mean, it's a gut issue. Anyone who's from Jackson is going to tell you how awful the roads are and how we have to swerve to avoid the potholes. And Jackson's not alone in that. And, who spent $2 million to build a private road to your neighborhood, right? I mean, it's something that his opponents are going to keep using because it's something that everybody can immediately understand.
And whether or not he's guilty, I think the perception that was immediately just, made very public and broad was that this was wrong, and everyone has to drive on the same crappy roads and bridges in Mississippi.
So we've made enough tangential references to the Attorney General Hood. Why don't we just dive right in? Give us your impressions of Attorney General Hood and handicap his chances.
Start with that one, or?
Sure. Okay. So General Hood, as Emily said, is from Northeast Mississippi, which is traditionally a very red part of the state. He is a Democrat, of course, but I think he's broadly viewed as a moderate. He's personally pro-life. He's like the biggest hunter in the history of Mississippi. He has a mullet, like literally has a mullet. This guy is he doesn't really speak in complete sentences. He's like, you can't even understand what he's saying if you can understand the sentence fragments that he's speaking. He really does have sort of that old school Mississippi political persona, and he's popular for that reason, even among some Republicans. If you look at various polls that have come out the last 3 or 4 years about how popular all of these potential candidates were or are, Jim Hood is consistently up there with the Phil Bryants of the world, who I believe is the most popular governor we've had, and that includes Haley Barbour if you look at certain polls. So, he, as a Democrat, will have to answer certainly to a lot of the national party lines, I think. I think I've got a couple of sources who hate Tate Reeves, and they're tallying the number of times that Tate publicly says something like Jim Hood's party of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. He has used that line like at least a dozen times in the last year.
In the last half hour.
For sure. I guarantee he's out somewhere tonight using that line at a fundraiser or something. But, I think Hood does have some legitimate questions to answer on policy that as Attorney General perhaps he's never had to discuss before. But, if this becomes a general election of Jim Hood versus Tate Reeves, it's going to get really interesting.
Hood spoke last Monday at a press forum in Jackson, and he was asked about that line that Tate Reeves uses about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and his response was, I haven't even met these people. He can say it all he wants to, but, that Hood is going to drive that point home. And Adam did a good job of describing it, but I want to add one thing. No one is going to out-Jesus Jim Hood. He has many, many Jesus references in his speeches and, taking care of the least among us, things like that. It's a very, low-key Mississippi church-going kind of way that I think a lot of people will relate to. Hood, though, let's be honest, he has a tough time ahead of him because he has roughly $1 million in his campaign fund going into this year, and Tate Reeves has 7 times that much money. So Reeves, yes, will probably have to spend some of his millions in the primary, but unless Reeves spends way down and Hood raises way up, they are unlikely to enter the general election season after August with an equal amount of money. I think Reeves is still going to have a financial advantage.
I think probably Waller's entrance into the Republican primary helps Jim some, though. They were seriously staring down the barrel of Tate Reeves has an easy primary win against Robert Foster, or relatively easy. I won't say easy, but and then will have to face the wrath of his massive campaign checkbook. I think Waller, when he announced his entrance into this Republican primary against Reeves, it really did make it more interesting. I think Reeves will have to spend a little bit more money, at least just a little bit more money in this primary before you even get to a general. So, if he can beat Waller in the primary, and you're Jim Hood looking ahead to the general, I think that you still like the fact that Waller's in this race and that Tate's going to have to spend a little money.
Yeah, if I'm hearing you, one of the strengths that Jim Hood has is an appeal to the white voter who traditionally or in recent history has been voting Republican, that he kind of goes over with the people not only in North Mississippi but the more conservative white voters. So, having said that, again, this race, like everything else in Mississippi, involves race. Sure. How does that affect Jim Hood's appeal to the black voters?
Well, let's step back a moment and look at the Democratic primary. Jim Hood does have an African-American opponent. There's a retired Jackson State University employee named Valisha P. Williams, who is making her first run for governor. I did a phone interview with her back when she first announced, and she has fully formed thoughts about issues. She's not someone who's just putting her name on the ballot. Now, she doesn't have much money, but I did see some signs up in Jackson this week. So somebody is doing something. And let's not forget the scenario from the last gubernatorial election where Democrats widely assumed that Vicki Slater was going to win their nomination. And then on election day, she lost to a man named Robert Gray, a long-haul truck driver who didn't even tell his mother and sister that he was running, didn't even vote for himself. So, things can happen. I'm not saying
crowning moment for the Democratic Party of Mississippi.
Right. I mean, and okay, so there's this to consider as well. In Mississippi, you don't register by party. You don't have to register as a Republican or Democrat, which means you can decide on election day which primary you're going to go vote in. Now, if you live in a county where most of the races that are important to you locally, supervisor, tax assessor, chancery clerk, are Democrats, but you consider yourself a Republican, heart of hearts, I really want to vote in the Republican primary, maybe you'll think, okay, I'll be fine with anybody who wins the Republican primary up ticket, but I'm going to go vote because I really care about my local races in the Democratic primary. Those people who, at heart, are really Republicans can vote in the Democratic primary and really mess with Jim Hood by voting for Valisha Williams or whoever else may be on the ballot. And I mean, it's legal to do so. There are people who question whether it's morally right, but I mean, it's legal to do that. And so, there are a lot of moving parts in these primaries.
I wanted to read this. I just transcribed this like a couple days ago, and you asked about race, and Valisha P. Williams, who is not at all a household name. She doesn't have money, like Emily said, but it seemed to me from my interview with her that she is going to focus on race. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to read this quick answer she gave when I asked, you would not only be the first black governor in Mississippi, you'd be the first woman ever elected. We've never even elected a black statewide official in Mississippi.
Since Reconstruction.
Right, since Reconstruction. And her answer to this question, it's 2019. Don't you think it's about time? I'll say this. There's not a Democrat who has held office in this state who hasn't been there because of the black vote, period. They could not hold a position without us. We African Americans have been lifting up Democrats for decades. They can't win without our vote. They haven't won without our vote. It's 2019. Isn't it about time they start supporting black folks? If she gets that message in front of enough people, mm-hmm. that's going to be a problem for Jim Hood. I don't know if she can because of her money situation or her lack of name ID, but she's clearly having these same thoughts right here. She's looking at Jim Hood, and his record as a prosecutor and as Attorney General, and saying there's something here that perhaps we need to consider before we elect him. So, yeah, that's a part of it.
Is there a way to know the percentage of African-American voters in the Democratic primary?
You can go back and look at the returns from different elections. And so because we don't register by party when we register to vote, we also don't register by race, right? And so you have to extrapolate by looking at the population. And so Claiborne County, for example, is over 85% African American, I think. And so you can look at the returns there. You can break it down precinct by precinct and see which candidates do well in which precinct based on the demographics. And so, yes, it is true that in Mississippi, African American voters tend, by and large, to vote Democratic. Not always, not across the board. But yes, it is still true, by and large. So African Americans are clearly an important voting group in the Democratic primary.
Admittedly, I did not go through precinct by precinct, but when we were covering the midterms last year, there were some campaign staffers for Mike Espy, who, of course, was running for the special U.S. Senate seat against Cindy Hyde-Smith, who said that in the primary, so they didn't actually have to, go up in a normal primary setting, but before that, they said that about two-thirds of Democratic primary voters were African American. Again, I haven't verified that, but it seems about right.
Feels about right. Yeah.
Let's turn to the lieutenant governor's race. We have a local entry here, Democrat Jay Hughes, state rep, and Delbert Hausman, who's very well known statewide Secretary of State now and has been for some time. What's going on with that race, and are there others that I'm forgetting about? Or
There is one other person, a man named Shane Quick, who is from DeSoto County, who has fewer than 100 Twitter followers and not his own picture on his account. I'm not saying that Twitter is the measurement of how serious you might be as a candidate, but all I've seen from him so far is, that. And I did follow him on Twitter the other day. He's very conservative.
Someone told me that when he qualified at the Republican Party headquarters in downtown Jackson, he told the woman who was there, handing in the papers, that he chopped firewood and sold it to have the fee to enter the race, the $100 fee or whatever.
I don't think Delbert did that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So moving right along, then back to the other two. Jay Hughes, can he get elected anywhere outside of Oxford? He's a very progressive guy. He's been a very good state rep. I think a lot of people are wondering, why is he giving up the safe seat here and representing our district to or perhaps the folly of running against Hausman?
Jay is largely self-funding his own campaign at this point. I don't know if or when he's going to consider expanding his attempt to raise money to try to bring more to the table. I don't know. Jay is a strong personality. He has been traveling around the state in the, what is it?
Imagine Wagon.
The Imagine Wagon, if you've seen the RV that he has. He made some Democratic voters extremely angry in the past several days by voting yes on a bill that would ban abortion once a fetal heartbeat can be detected, which is at about 6 weeks pregnancy, which is honestly before some women may know that they are pregnant. And the abortion rights supporters really went after him on Twitter, and he snapped back, and they snapped back, and it's been quite something to watch from a distance. So I've seen some of the abortion rights people publicly declaring that I am taking my Jay Hughes bumper sticker off my car and I will never vote for him. That's a small but vocal group in Mississippi. I don't know how much that will hurt him in the long run. If he's the only person on the primary ballot and he doesn't have an opponent, he advances to November, no problem. I think what will influence the lieutenant governor's race a lot is whether the Democrats are able to field credible candidates from top to bottom on statewide races, and whether Democratic voters feel like they have a reason to go in and vote, Jim Hood, Jay Hughes, whoever else is on the ballot, if they feel like they're getting a package deal.
Jay very much is his own individual, I guess. I don't know how to put it. The first thing he did when he was elected to the state house in 2015, so January of 2016 is when he walked in the building for the first time. He ran for House Minority Leader. So it's within the Democratic caucus. House members vote for a leader at the beginning of every term. That's typically something it's almost a formality in most cases, but he walked in and ran. This guy who they had never heard of, the caucus had never really even heard of, asks to be the minority leader, which had previously been held by David Berria, and they ended up electing Berria again. That rubbed a lot of people in the Democratic Party, at least in Jackson, the wrong way. They thought, who is this guy who's coming in? He's self-entitled. He's coming in to try to, restructure how we do things. A source of mine, a close source of mine who works in Democratic politics, once called him to me the Donald Trump of the Mississippi Democratic Party, because he really does sort of have his own way of doing things, and I think his whole message really has been, we've been doing things this way for a very long time. Maybe we ought to take a look at that. What he's done, though, in this lieutenant governor's race for the last 2 years on his Imagine wagon, he's gone across the state and really tried to appeal to public school teachers. That's his big area of focus is public education. And if you're looking at social media or if you're reading his email blasts that he sends out, the "It all starts with education" slogan, all that, I mean, it's hard to see that. Or it's hard to not see that he has at least gotten some momentum with the public school teachers. And that's a huge block of voters in Mississippi. 30,000 public school teachers, but then you add their spouses and their immediate families. And it's just that's a big potential block of voters that I think he's done a decent job. And this is statewide, not just here in North Mississippi or Lafayette County, but appealing to those folks. So it's going to be interesting to see if they stay on board.
Well, you dealt with the Democratic side of that equation. Give us your insights on the Republican side.
Yep. So Delbert Hosemann, I don't think this would hurt his feelings. He has the worst bumper sticker name in the world, right? I mean, it's this long, and who names their kid Delbert anymore? And Hosemann with 2 N's, and but he has made the most of that. He has gotten elected with these ads where the nice little old lady calls him Gilbert and everything else. And it's to the point now where he's just campaigning as Delbert, like he's Cher or Madonna, something like that. Hosemann is, he's an attorney. He grew up in Vicksburg. He lives in Northeast Jackson. He's a rich guy. He's done well in business and in the law. And he, a lot of Republicans really like him, and there are Republicans who, just as there are Republicans who don't like Tate Reeves, there are those who don't like Delbert Hosemann, but for the moment, he's it. And like Shane Quick has mentioned, is probably not going to peel that many votes away from him. So when you get down to Hosemann and Jay Hughes, Hosemann will bring a lot of money and will bring that name recognition that he's, made the most of. And Jay Hughes, I think, is going to be feistier going into the general election.
Jay Hughes is running attack ads already on Delbert Hosemann. It was January 15th, I think, and there was a digital ad that was a straight up attack ad. I mentioned polling earlier about Jim Hood being popular even among conservatives. Delbert is also very popular, and he's popular even among some Democrats as well. He's consistently up in the top 1 or 2, 3 spots of most popular statewide elected official, which is really interesting to me because I have a hard time finding anybody who knows anything that he's done while he's been Secretary of State. So I think sort of similarly to Jim Hood in the governor's race, Delbert's going to have to answer a lot of policy questions that I'm not sure he's ever had to answer before. So I'm looking forward to asking some of those questions and learning more about him myself. But I do know that he's popular and he's well-funded.
I will say this, that I have heard Delbert talk about issues as Secretary of State, and his pitch is this: as Secretary of State, I've increased the amount of money that the state receives from the publicly owned 16th section land, so bringing in more money for public schools. His predecessor did that as well. 16th section land revenue has increased under Democrats and Republicans. Hosemann also says that as Secretary of State, he has overseen the beginning of the voter ID law that voters approved on a statewide ballot measure, and that Mississippi has not been sued over voter ID, whereas Texas and some other states have been sued. So people can take issue with the way he's done it, but I have heard him address issues. 16th section land is something like people's eyes will glaze over. It's not sexy, but he'll talk about it.
Let's go down the ballot, just not every office, but what interesting races are developing for the other statewide offices?
I'm really intrigued by AG. course, Jim Hood is running for governor, so that seat becomes open. On the Republican side, you've got, I'd say that the top two candidates at this point, and again, as Emily said, we've got until March 1st for candidates to qualify, so it's not set in stone yet who's running for what. But so far, we've got Lynn Fitch, the current state treasurer, who is another very popular statewide official who's been on the ballot. She's got the name ID. She'll raise some money. And then you've got a state representative named Mark Baker, who's another one of these Rankin County guys. He has served 4 terms in the state house, and he is, I didn't think about like using one single word to describe Mark Baker. He's tough. He's a prosecutor. He has spent almost his entire time in the state house railing against Jim Hood, saying that Jim Hood is exploiting the powers of his office to help his friends, land state contracts to defend the state in certain lawsuits, or Jim Hood is overstepping his reach as AG to shine light on special interests or whatever it might be. Mark Baker has been Jim Hood's biggest, most public critic, with maybe the exception of Tate Reeves. What really intrigues me about that race, though, I think both of those candidates are interesting. Mark Baker will raise some money. He's tight with Tate Reeves. They run in the same circles. How does Mark Baker use sort of his vast background and knowledge of what Jim Hood has done while he's been Attorney General to help Tate Reeves even in the governor's race? So if you're Mark Baker running for Attorney General, you're saying Jim Hood did all this terrible stuff for 12 years or whatever it's been, and this is why I would be better. But does that also help someone like Tate Reeves or Valicia P. Williams in the primary or whatever it might be? That's why that race is interesting to me. And Lynn Fitch, of course, is, like I said, very popular. And, Emily, we haven't had very many women who served in statewide roles before.
No, that's true. And I will say there is no love lost professionally between Tate Reeves and Lynn Fitch. She succeeded him as state treasurer, and they are just like this. So Tate Reeves as governor and Lynn Fitch as attorney general would be an extremely interesting relationship. Mississippi has had adversarial relationships between governors and attorneys general before, and there's an argument to be made that maybe it's better if there is some of that conflict in the executive branch instead of all just kind of being on the same page, but that's interesting. Now, also in the Attorney General's race, Jennifer Riley Collins, who just announced late last week, she is the state executive director of the ACLU, and she is African American, and she has 32 years experience as a military officer, and she's an attorney. She won't be shy campaigning. She will stand up and advocate for the things that she believes in. The ACLU may not always be the most popular group in Mississippi, understatement, but among Democratic primary voters, if she gets an opponent in the primary, I don't think that's going to be a problem for her. Going into the general election, the question then becomes, how much money does she have to go up against a Republican? And will there be some effect from the top of the ticket to the bottom for Democrats to feel like they have a package deal?
We want to invite the audience to join this conversation, but I want to ask another question as you're thinking about your question. In this robust political discussion, I wondered how long it would be before the name Donald Trump came up. And Adam, I think it was 35 minutes in before you mentioned him. Former House Speaker Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, but there's no question here in Mississippi there's an overhang with Donald Trump. I asked the two of you, what impact is Donald Trump, even the specter of Donald Trump, likely to have in the upcoming Mississippi election?
I think you're already seeing it some with Tate Reeves' style on Twitter, going after fake news and having this more kind of confrontational approach than he had in any of his previous statewide races. So I think that is one thing. I do think that there will be a great effort, just as Cindy Hyde-Smith campaigned as somebody who was going to go to Washington and always be an ally of President Trump. I think there will be Republicans running in Mississippi who will campaign the same way. I'm going to stay here in Mississippi and hold this office and, you know, be an ally.
You mentioned earlier there's a press luncheon that we do. We have once a month or so. Tate Reeves spoke at it. He was the first one this year, back in late January, I guess it was. And he walks up to the podium, and it's a room full of reporters mostly, reporters, but mostly lobbyists and interest group leaders and folks who just kind of want to shake hands with the politicians we have come speak to us. But it is the press club luncheon. I mean, they're there to talk to the press, and they know we'll write stories about whatever. Tate walks up to the podium and looks at us and says, it's good to be here with all of my friends in the media. I just know that for the next 10 months or so during this election, y'all are going to cover me just like the press has covered Donald Trump. And, you know, so he like takes a swipe at the press at this press function.
Did he call you scum?
He didn't actually use that word. He was greeted with silence.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think Governor Bryant has definitely carried the fake news, Trump's fake news torch very well here in Mississippi. I saw a tweet yesterday. I'm sure most of y'all saw. There was a headline snafu in the Clarion Ledger over the weekend, and the out-of-state design firm that designs the newspaper for the Clarion Ledger called a Mississippi State event an Ole Miss event. That you know.
And then the world caught on fire.
Right. Tate Reeves tweeted, y'all should go look, it's probably his second or third to last tweet, it was yesterday. He quote tweeted it and said, "This is why no one in Mississippi trusts the press," or something like that. So, you know, I expect that to be on full display, for sure.
And on that high note, let's go to the audience now for questions. Who will go first? Yes, sir, in the back. Let me repeat the question for our TV audience. The question is, will out-of-state money likely influence this election? California put a lot of money in some other elections recently.
Out-of-state money always influences elections here. There are PACs that give money, especially at the top of the ticket. So the short answer is yes, there will be out-of-state money here.
We're one of three governor's races in America this year. It's us, Louisiana, I think Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
There are no federal races for either Congress or Senate unless there's a special or two, which might happen. So I expect there to be a lot of media attention. You know, we've got somebody in Jim Hood who could very well be elected governor in Ruby Red, Mississippi, as a Democrat. Sort of the same deal as we saw last year with Mike Espy and Cindy Hyde-Smith, and the national media just swarmed. And when that happened, the national money skyrocketed. So I think, yeah, just because we're one of so few races that are interesting this year, I think, yeah, you can expect national money to start pouring in.
Probably for both parties.
For sure,
honestly.
for sure.
Emily, didn't the National Chamber of Commerce send millions of dollars down here when tort reform was an issue?
Yes. Tort reform, trying to change the legal system to limit jury awards to people who say they've suffered injuries or other bad effects from wrongdoing. And yes, those groups the pro-business groups have sent a lot of money supporting. And so I think in the Attorney General's race, that will probably become a factor as well.
Yes, ma'am. To repeat, how does the national coverage of Mississippi impact your coverage? Is that the fair? Yes.
So a lot of what I write for the Associated Press actually is national coverage. And I have discussions with my editors about sweep and scope. You know, have the sort of the sweep of the story, put it in the broader context of what's going on in the nation, and the scope of sort of the the history of Mississippi, and by the way, cram that all into 600 words. So, but I think that what you were going to see is more in-depth coverage from reporters who actually live in the state and cover it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, depending on what the race is, versus the reporters who come swooping in just for the one big story before the governor's election. Or like in the case with the U.S. Senate race last year, we had a lot of reporters swooping in because, honestly, because of the Cindy Hyde-Smith public hanging remark and then her not apologizing and not backing off from that. I mean, that became sort of a spiraling cycle of news at that point.
That race, yeah, I think this is that was a really good question that we, I think, at least at Mississippi Today, and I know at other outlets here in the state, we like to think about this every day, especially when, there are national reporters in town trying to get all the scoops and trying to, be first on a big story. In last year's Senate race, they were here because of the public hanging comments or whatever. And then a local outlet reported a story. They had dug up old pictures from Cindy Hyde-Smith's high school yearbook. Y'all might remember that. And while the national media was already here, they saw these pictures of Cindy Hyde-Smith, dressed in, Confederate stuff, waving flags.
That was when she was an adult, actually. She was ag commissioner.
That's right.
Right.
But even the yearbook photos, she went to a a segregation academy, and she sent her kid there. So the national media, who are already here in the state reporting all this stuff, they see this story and they're like, "Oh yeah, like this is what's gonna blow the news up." And so they're all reporting this. And during the runoff, I was asked to come on MSNBC to just talk about the race and everything. And the segment right before me, I'm sitting in a studio in Ocean Springs, and I've got like the earpiece in, and I can hear what's going on in the segment before me. And they're talking about, like, there's some national talking heads saying that, like, Mike Espy, he's definitely going to win this race now that this yearbook controversies come out. Like, Cindy Hyde-Smith went to a SEG Academy. She sent her kid to a SEG Academy. There's no way he can't win. Comes to me, and the host of the show asks me, "So is this going to be a big deal?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think so." Like, I'm like, this, not to downplay the importance of having conversations about these academies that were established in the 60s and 70s for white parents to avoid sending their kids to school with black kids. But, this story isn't going to play in Mississippi like you think it is. And, I tried to say that in the best way possible to make me not sound like a racist and, like, defending this kind of stuff. But that's just, like, one example of how it can be frustrating for us because we know the context and we know sort of how these things play in the state, whereas national reporters don't necessarily know that or care to know that in some cases.
Dr. Norton.
Emily, you started out a long time ago, so a lot of reporters exist. How has government been changed by fewer reporters?
For everybody to hear that, Dr. Norton asked, how has the trend toward fewer reporters in Jackson impacted journalism and government?
Sure. I think in answering that question, I want to look not only at Jackson, but also at city and county level government. It's better to have more reporters, bottom line. When you have more reporters, you have more people who can request the public records, who can dig up the complicated background on, God knows, somebody's real estate deal or, a contract to build roads to certain places. The things that may not be as exciting but are actually substantial and actually matter, it's much better to have more people looking at it. Now, I will say in the time that I've covered Mississippi, I graduated from Ole Miss in '89, and I have covered city and county government. I've been covering state government since 1994. The number of reporters covering the State House, we used to have a full-time press corps of 8 people. That dropped down to about 5, but now it has built back up. There is some more interest growing with that, but there are stories that are not covered in any kind of depth in this state. There's no one really covering agriculture policy, which matters a lot. Agriculture is still a big deal in the state. Are there scandalous things happening? I don't know, because no one's covering it. There are honestly not enough reporters to cover the whole, like the dozens and dozens of bills that are filed in the legislature that actually affect people's daily lives. I mean, we try to write about the most important things, and we try to write about the things that we know are going to have a national audience, like the abortion bills. But I mean, there are just...
It's easy to miss stuff.
Yeah, it is easy to miss things. And there's a lot that goes on in the legislature because the Mississippi legislature exempts itself from the open meetings laws. So, I mean, there are things that happen at that Capitol. It's just a fact of life. There are things that happen behind closed doors that we wouldn't know about that if we had 100 reporters up there. You know, some of the things that happen behind closed doors. What you have to rely on then is source building. You have to have the people who will leave the meeting and call the reporter and say, you should hear what just went on. And I'm going to give you enough information that you can write a well-sourced story.
I'll give you an unsolicited, but hopefully it will be appreciated shout out here, Dr. Norton. I was talking to Emily, a couple weeks ago about this event, and it came up in conversation in the press room. I think we probably have about, 8 or 10 full-time reporters covering the Capitol every day, and 3 of us graduated from Ole Miss in 2014 from the journalism school. So I think going back to what Emily just said, there are a lot of holes in coverage and gaps in coverage, and that's really, really sad. And I think that's very harmful to every Mississippian, whether you realize it or not. But I think there are opportunities for any of you young journalists in here who want to actually do this job. There are opportunities out there to get in and do some good work immediately and to have an impact, and especially in a state like Mississippi, which just needs it more than ever.
And to do some good work on the local level. I mean, it is a great place to start. I started at the Vicksburg Post with Charlie Mitchell. I covered city government, but cover city government, cover county government. Those people are spending your money and your parents' money and your aunt and uncle's money, and who knows with the culverts and the supervisors and so much that's going on that's important that's not being written about. I mean, if the newspaper's not doing it, nobody's doing it. County government stories are not great visually, so TV tends not to cover it very much. But I mean, there's a place in this state and a great need for people to stay around and dig in.
In closing, this has been a great affirmation on the importance of journalism, and also an affirmation of what Ole Miss journalists can do. You heard from Emily and her great experience. Just like yesterday when Adam was here as a student and editor of the Daily Mississippian, and he's already making a major impact statewide. So Emily and Adam, thank you very much for joining us tonight.